Thanks very much for this one. Also, the people online, again, you may ask questions now and put it in the section for your web stream, and then we take it from there. Are there already questions in the room? Yes, please.
So, hello, I'm Anne-Pierre Picard. I'm a blood cancer patient advocate working with the Lymphoma Coalition, the Acute Leukemia Advocates Network, and also Myeloma Patient Europe. I've got one comment and two questions, if I may. The first comment is that I realized that there's the views of patient organizations and patients has not been shared. So all stakeholders except patients have had the opportunity to share their views. So that's just a comment. The first question is for Elisabeth Vries, and that's regarding the MCBS. So maybe it's only my ignorance, but I'm just wondering, are patient organizations consulted, and also by defining standards as well for the quality of life standards? Are they also included in that process, both for the scoring and for the quality of life standards?
So the scoring, you can't influence that as a patient or as a doctor. That's like 2 times 2 is 4, and you can't change it. But we definitely did patient consultation in the development of the scale. Yeah.
But you mentioned about the quality of life standards, like the definition of quality of life standards also
yes,
are patient.
So that was done together with the EORTC. And now about patient consultation, I don't dare to say that by heart, but I do know that EORTC has heavily involvement with patients for their quality of life approaches. So I would think so.
Yeah. Thank you. And the second question I have is for Roisin. You mentioned that you would like patient experts and clinical experts to come with a non-advocate point of view. Could you elaborate on that? Because I have an interpretation, but I don't want to say what I think I understood. I prefer to ask you first what you mean by this.
Yeah, so this was something that we were developing during the service contract that we did for the 2 years under UNATA 21. And we were trying to have some distinction between what you would bring as a stakeholder, which is a known viewpoint that you want to put across, usually as part of a representative organization. But then we recognized the need to have a patient expert actually involved in individual assessment. So one being a more general viewpoint, but actually involved in an individual assessment where we do look at conflicts of interest and different things like that. But to have a patient expert actually there with the assessment team to be able to address questions that they might have, whether it be about outcomes, whether it would be about various different assessments that they're doing. So we did make this distinction, and we did write a document on this to have those 2 different roles. So it's probably advocacy is the wrong word, but it's to do with the broad viewpoint you're bringing as a stakeholder within the stakeholder network, for example, distinct to actually working on an individual product assessment where you're bringing a patient experience to the individual work.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hello, I'm Christian Dirks from Berlin. Thank you very much for this tour d'horizon through up-to-date hematology this afternoon. I'm led by the impression that within the next 2 years we might be facing oncology therapies that are very much personalized, that are personalized antibodies created from the tumor itself. Companies like CureVac or Nutcracker are well on their way to present something like this. My question is for Carolyn, of course. Is in your department an ongoing discussion on how to regulate this? How can we give a marketing authorization to a drug that's being created for one person? And the question to the others, of course, is evident. How do we evaluate the benefit in such products? We've had problems with soloists in Germany, jurisdiction from March this year, and the soloist was not personalized. It was just there was no other therapy, and our court concluded that it cannot be assessed in terms of benefit. So I'd be interested in your opinion and whether you share the sense of urgency. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for your question. Actually, we are one of the reasons why we are monitoring also the horizon scanning and we are having these discussions with developers is to know what's coming. And then that's kind of feed into the work plan discussions for the different committees and working parties. So we have indeed identified a number of, let's say, of upcoming areas where we will need new guidance. There are a number of reflection papers, for instance, on platform trials. That's kind of going into that direction where you have different biomarkers that could be used to identify different type of patients. We have some experience with autologous ATMPs also that based on the assessment. And so I would say it's pretty much, yes, we have discussion as to what will be needed. Now, as everything, guidance are driven by the experience, and therefore, I would say I don't think we will be in a position now to issue a guidance as to how the development of a personalized medicine would look like until we have those dialogues with the different stakeholders and the developers, and we start seeing really the first products that are coming in that area. But indeed, this is also fed into through scientific advice discussions with the developers. So that's certainly something we have in mind for the future. How quickly, it will really depend on how quickly these developments are coming in practice, I guess, beyond development.
If I may follow up with that, and trying to link with a question that has been made by someone virtually. There has been a lot of talk on collaboration, and maybe picking up on that very singular example. How would collaboration work in this such environment? So what are the type of collaborations that could be possible in an environment where it's very personalized, and then how do you measure something that n equals 1? So what is the evidence? So what kind of collaboration would you think can be done between regulators, HTA, patients, and so on? And I'm asking, of course, to everyone.
I guess I can probably start. We have, I mean, one point of entry could be a joint scientific consultation for a developer looking at developing one of those products, and then we have this applicant would have the opportunity to use the framework we have put in place even before the HTA regulation becomes in place, and have this dialogue. And while I don't think we might necessarily have immediate answers, I guess it also opened a dialogue and ensure that both parts of the assessment regulators and HTA are aware of their needs in their scope, I guess. So that would be, to me, the first point of entry.
The first thing that comes to my mind is something like the PRIME pathways, where you have the opportunity for iterative dialogue between the health technology developer, experts, regulators. You have early assignment of a rapporteur, co-rapporteur. Mm-hmm. Having said that, I immediately say, what's the counterpart for that in HTA? You know, is there something like that that would allow the rapid dialogue with HTA organizations in a way that would enable that? I mean, I don't, there's no easy answer to the question about what do you do with this highly personalized therapy, but you're going to need a process where that dialogue can iterate.
Yeah, so you're right. There isn't currently a process for that iterative process. But that conversation, as Caroline said at the beginning for the joint scientific consultation, of what might be needed. So it's developing that evidence generation piece fully, and really putting down what HTA bodies would look for, and whether it be available at the regulatory stage or whether it becomes available later on. But setting up the trial design from the beginning with that other lens in mind of HTA, so that you are preparing these two pathways of what will be required at a later stage. But in fact, we don't have this. We do have a joint scientific consultation within the regulation. We don't have that repeated yet. Not that I want to take on another thing, but yes, it's something to keep in mind, though, yes.
I guess from a clinical standpoint, we look at the same question from guidelines standpoint, so we don't only look at HTA. It's the second wave of personalized medicine. The first time was several years ago when we thought that having 3 oncogenic markers with 3 drugs would be better than 1. And it hasn't really proven to be the best way, because we were also quite impressed about the accumulation of side effects in some of these patients. So I think just now we don't have a method just to look at it, but we also have to be aware, also look at like CureVac or others. The level from which we start is different from where they started like 10 years ago. In many diseases now we have already chronic causes and probably even cure with some of the established drugs. So I'm not yet that optimistic that this is coming within 2 years.
And probably regarding, can it be incorporated? When we talk about the ESMO MCBS, we didn't have the opportunity initially to judge single-arm studies in a non-curative setting. But we adapted the scale to make that possible, and in the new version we will also have the opportunity to score single-arm studies in a curative setting. So the aim is to score whatever is approved, and we will create a solution, I'm sure. But first it has to be approved and has to be meaningful.
To all panelists, please speak directly in the mic, and if you are done, switch off. Right, so exactly. Before handing over to Monterre, let me ask Dr. Kaiser and the whole panel, but it's specifically on the in the web for Dr. Kaiser, 2 questions on outcomes and balancing the outcomes. Let me read. Dr. Kaiser, you have emphasized the importance of long-term side effects in cancer treatment. What would be your recommendation to balance between early access with less evidence and thus more uncertainty on long-term effects on one hand versus later access with more evidence and thus less uncertainty on long-term effects on the other hand, especially in conditions with a high unmet medical need? And the second question, very similar also to outcomes management. From your personal experience, how important is quality of life as a trade-off versus limited added benefit and moderate increased OS or PFS? Could physician organizations do more to enhance acceptance? What can healthcare developers do?
Yeah, 2 very good questions. And they are, of course, interlinked when we talk about long-term side effects and quality of life. I think we definitely have an overlap of the 2. And to balance that effectively with any benefit that we see in terms of numeric PFS OS, for example, is exactly the challenge. So it's definitely that I think more tools are needed, and I think a reference was already made earlier, for example, about neuropathy and a grade 2 neuropathy not telling you anything, to be frank. Even if I read a trial report, I don't know yet what that means when I see the summary of that report in relationship to, even if I see there is a benefit, I find it very hard, unless I have used the drug myself, what to make of that. I would always ask a colleague that has really treated patients with this drug to find out before I make really a judgment about that. And that brings, of course, slightly the circle back to the first question, because I alluded to it in my presentation thing as well. Yes, gaining the experience firsthand, I think, is important. I think where we have been advocating for a long time, and I think this has been across many medical societies, actually to do more research, to do more trials that reflect the standard population that we're seeing in our clinics, that are not geared only to accelerated approval. And I think it would solve a lot of the problems. I think the slight frustration that we're seeing, and I'm very sorry if I'm slightly cheekily turning this question maybe slightly back and bending it a bit to the industry representative on this. And this is not really personal. This is not even a criticism of anyone personal here. The interesting thing is just we're now going to conferences regularly. We're coming with a proposal for a new trial, and we're saying this is data that could be very, very useful for an HTA process later down the line. You know, we could run a phase 3 trial with relatively light touch, follow up. The cost is not too high. We would project that often at about 5 million or so, which I think is nothing compared to a registration trial. Now, it's still a lot of money, don't get me wrong. But the interesting bit is that we're talking to representatives who are very much, even within company structures now, more and more admitted openly, they're finding themselves on the same problem that the key performance metrics within industry has not yet moved on. All key performance indicators, and these of course ultimately come back to personal boni as well, are linked to FDA approval. There is not a single one that was linked to an HTA approval and reimbursement. And I'm nearly wondering, I like this human aspect always. How can I expect, honestly, this is kind of like, this is very basic human psychology. If there is a boardroom with, 13 people in there or whatever, and all of their boni are linked to only the FDA approval, but not to the HTA approval, how can I expect that the trial is funded that will support the one and not the other? And I'm wondering, is there going to be a change with the critical mass? I'm sorry, it's a slightly, I don't want to I hate putting you on the spot, but it's I think I would want to know, is there a perspective,
Can I add a little bit? And
Sure.
then, so we have to realize that until recently, when clinical studies were published, toxicity was not published very well. Nowadays, good journals ask all the toxicity often to be in supplemental files, but it's in there. So toxicity that is reported on clinical trials is in general short-term toxicity. If we especially speak about curative treatment, the long-term toxicity is of course very, very important for patients, but often the data are not there. So there is absolutely a lack of information, and you may have it from your own clinical practice, but we should together, pharma, and we should try to get that kind of data available. For the new ESMO MCBS version, we also spoke with patients, and now in the curative setting, toxicity, as far as we know, will be annotated, but no punishment will be given for toxicity because we are talking about curative treatments. So this is the last entry of toxicity, also more in the curative setting for the scoring. So if you look at the visual tool, you can see that there is toxicity, and you can decide yourself as a patient, if you play the violin, that you don't accept neurotoxicity.
I feel compelled to make a comment. I think, times are changing, honestly. I think within industry, I can see where the groups are that are responsible for ensuring not just regulatory success, but HTA success, if you will. I mean, those parts of the organization are rising and rising in the decision-making authority within all companies. And the latest trend really is across industry. This is not just with Bayer, but integrated evidence planning, which means thinking about the total range of evidence that you're going to need to not only have regulatory approval, but address all the questions that will come when you commercialize the drug. That is now being brought into early stages of development, and it's really a critical part of what we're doing, and incorporation of patients into the thinking about what that integrated evidence planning ought to be. What are the PROs that ought to go in? Do we need to do patient preference studies so that we can know the right trade-offs between different adverse event profiles and the benefits that patients see versus, let's say maybe longer time to progression or longer survival? All of those trade-offs, we need the patient's perspective into those. So I think it's a work in progress, but I think it's evolving.
Monter is the next, but if I may add a quick comment to this one. Yes, I fully agree. The time is changing. The time is changing also in terms of, let's say, the US versus European balance. And knowing, let's say, what's going on from the inside, there are repeated discussions on developing medicines only for the US or primarily for the US and not bringing it to Europe because there's a single-arm trial only. And I think the EU HTA is a unique opportunity to bundle the strengths of Europe to be remain competitive in an extremely competitive global environment. With this one, Monter, you had a question.
I was surprised to realize how many products in hemato-oncology have reached the market. And I was wondering whether you believe it's because it's rare condition, making product eligible for orphan designation, plus cancer. Both features are going to ease the access and allow better price, or is it the chance of the research that was more successful in this field than others? And a lot of those products are developed through single-arm trials. Based on the available guideline for EU HTA, how do you believe they will welcome single-arm trials?
Okay. I would think all you're thinking, I would completely agree with it. It has probably been a combination of, yes, there being orphan designations for some of these, which certainly have accelerated the process, but I think it is undoubtedly really lived experience that the advances in terms of survival that have been made in these hematological conditions have been, I think, preceding a bit what we're now seeing on a broader scale in solid oncology as well. There were really, really very clearly effective biological drugs that were just simply not available before. And one of the ones that I alluded to, for example, thalidomide, was even a repurposing of something that had been shelved as an absolute horrid drug in the cabinet and turned out to be a big innovator. So I think several things came together, but efficacy did definitely play a big role as well. And I think the other question is maybe not so much my domain.
So I guess single-arm trials aren't a problem per se, but when you want to compare against something, they do become problematic, and there's no doubt about that. I asked this question. We had a symposium yesterday, and one of our leading oncologists was talking at it, and I did ask him this question. I said, well, when does the ethical situation arise that I said, is there a possibility that it's a single-arm trial is suitable because of the ethical situation? He shook his head quite energetically to say, we do need to push towards randomized controlled trials, and we don't do it enough, perhaps, that there is sometimes a possibility to do an RCT. And I think we have to realize that if we only have a single-arm trial, we are going to run into problems with the comparative effectiveness. There are methods to apply, and we do that, but often we're missing key pieces of information to match patients to external controls. So it is a little bit more problematic. I do think there's a combination of doing more randomized controlled trials. Even small ones can do a lot more than perhaps a big single-arm study. So I don't want to give up on RCTs, but to know that there will be challenges when you're looking at comparative effectiveness, because we don't have sufficient information often to do the matching properly. So, yeah.
If I can follow, in fact, regulators, we have published recently a reflection paper on single-arm trials as well, and the idea is indeed that, and we are doing, as part of scientific advice, pushing for RCTs, and there might be actually even conditions where in the past, single-arm trials were only the one feasible, and now we are kind of saying, well, now you can do also RCT. So that's certainly something that I think we are on the same boat in terms of, making sure that RCTs remain the standard for good evidence. So maybe that's an area where we can work together a bit better as well.
I think a key area of need. If you look globally at HTA perspectives on drugs that are developed with single-arm trials, you see huge variability in the acceptance of alternative methods of comparison. So some HTAs readily accept modeling and simulation to get at the counterfactual. Others accept intrapatient comparisons. Others accept historical controls. But it's such a patchwork. We don't have guidance about when we need to run an RCT if we want to have our HTA success versus alternatives like single-arm trials or multi-tumor trials combined with alternative forms of comparative evidence generation. It's really, we need a clear signal. This is one of those areas where we need a clear signal.
So just one question. So one of the questions that has come also virtually from several people is the engagement of different stakeholders. Several of you have talked about that. When is that plan? So both in the future development of JCA and before in the technical documents that are now being prepared, will there be any open for discussion before their final approval?
Yeah, so both for the joint scientific consultation and for the joint clinical assessment, we have clinical experts and patient experts involved in both. So actually while we're doing it, so I think it's really important in the joint scientific consultation stage that we do have both actually. For the JCA, we have put out through UNITA 21 a clear guideline on the role that both can play in that active assessment stage, and then obviously there's a stakeholder network afterwards. But yeah.
On the methodological papers, will you share it before implementing it?
So we've done quite a lot of public consultation on some of the methodological papers under UNITA 21. It's now moving through the coordination group, but that's still being discussed. So I actually can't give you an answer just yet until the subgroup's feedback. Yeah.
Just for the point of discussion, I'd like to challenge a little bit. I saw in the regulation that single experts are as part of what you wrote down. But you also, I think, if I understand it correctly, the expert express their personal opinion, they're responsible for that. I think it would make sense to change to networks than to increase it. I think the evidence would be higher. That would also include the patient, at least in my point, and I think it should include consultation already. I know it's a challenge, but at least our experience seems to be positive.
Yeah, no, I agree. Elicitation of some of this information, it's actually quite a technical area, and you do need more than one. You actually do need a number of different experts and patient or clinical experts. Our big challenge is finding people who can do that. It's not easy, actually. And we struggled a lot trying to find patients, but also clinical experts to actually be able to do this. It's time consuming, and I think, Martin, you were describing the different workloads that people have, probably, or availability to be able to do some of this work. So it's, I don't disagree. I do think it's best to have more than one. I suppose it's looking at the type of information as well you're eliciting and the questions that you're asking at various different time points. But we're in agreement, I think.
Yeah, François Meyer.
Thank you. I'm François Meyer from Paris. Would like to highlight a point that was mentioned but not discussed a lot, but maybe could be important, is that about not about drugs but about biomoleculars that was mentioned. Caroline, you had a slide and asking the question: are we going towards more histology-independent indications? We have from Elisabeth the result of a survey of about biomolecular tests. And the results, if I'm understanding is correct, is that just simple biomarkers are available and used, and that more advanced are not very well used. And now we have large NGS panels that are available, well, that are possibly available, but are not really used. And this seems to me like something that could really change the way oncology drugs are developed, maybe the way oncology treatments, oncology centers are organized. And for some instance, for some rare, very rare cancers, you will never have a histology, a trial specific for this particular cancer, this particular histological type, but maybe you can have answers from a genomic study of the tumor to be compared to the efficacy of certain drugs that could be of importance. So is this aspect of, with all the hopes and all the limits we have, because NGS panels exist, but are not really available, not used, not very well known by all oncologists, by some yes, but not, and something that could change the way to evaluate drugs as well. So don't you think there should be some focus on this particular question with all involved actors participating in such a work?
What I know is that in the Netherlands, a study is running, which is a huge study with different drugs where patients can be included based on their findings with NGS. And that is now, with the help of an EU grant, also starting in several countries in Europe. But we are still speaking about the situation before it's going to be an approved indication by EMA. But so I think there are nice initiatives ongoing now in Europe.
Question from the panel, from the external panel, from Daniel Wiedmer, a general practitioner. I just read it. I found Martin Kaiser's list of criteria for choosing experts fascinating, particularly the impact on the health system. The Academic Association of GPs, WONCA, has an interest group on oncology and underlines the importance of the family doctor for prevention and screening, but also throughout treatment, where he is contacted by the patient for questions or clarifications up to the palliative care setting. How do you see the integration of family doctors in this outsourcing process?
Again, a very good question. I think it comes down, of course, to knowing the ins and outs of your specific healthcare system to start with, and where the division between tertiary care, secondary care, and primary care really runs. And you can, of course, go the hard way. One of the hard ways, I think, is being run in the UK, where the primary care resource has just been reduced over so much time that patients always turn to tertiary care when they have a question, which is maybe not the ideal one. If you want to divide that differently, I think I agree. I think in the future there should be much more integration with primary care physicians on all levels. I think it starts with the screening question. The screening question is at the moment being run to a large extent by tertiary centers, but to be fair, the brunt of the delivery will be lying with primary care. So any system or any research that's not including that, I think I would, if I was a funder, I would not even touch that, to be frank. But it will be an interesting question with more treatments being available, patients living for decades. I think maybe all sides will benefit if the primary care team will be more integrated in this. But it comes down to the same question and around the incentives of whether we learn more about how to use a drug long term, to understand the long-term toxicities, or whether the incentives are set on quick access. I mean, I think this is unfortunately one of the ethical questions that we're also going to be facing. I think we all want quick access. I know now in my disease, new bispecific antibodies are really fantastic. I would like to have them tomorrow, but I don't know yet about their long-term consequences. And I think there will inevitably be more discussion moving forward with oncology outcomes improving, whether we might have to tolerate a slower access to them for a purpose of having it thought through how the aftercare is happening, whether primary care plays a role in that, for example.
Yes, I'd like to go back again to the question that was asked to you and your comment about the the single arm trial. So patient organizations, patients don't want to have access to all new treatments. That's not true. There is this perception that patient organizations want to have access to everything that's approved by EMA. That's not true. This is a fallacy. This is not true. We want to have access to drugs that potentially are doing better than standard of care. And to do that, it's important to have RCTs. And obviously, we're not talking about orphan disease areas where it's not possible to do so, but in lymphoma, I mean, come on, in lymphoma, there are ways to do RCTs in a lot of populations. And more often than not, we've got single-arm trials. And that's not acceptable. How do we, as patient organizations, tell parent of a child? I mean, you've got children get lymphoma, adolescents do get lymphoma. You tell the parents, oh, you know what, there's a new drug. It's great. It's been, developed in a single-arm trial. We have no idea it's doing better than standard of care, but you should go for it. This, from a patient perspective, a lot of people in the industry, I'm not sure you would actually recommend your family and friends to go for a drug on a single-arm trial because you don't know if it's doing better. It could be a chance, but it could be a threat. And so what we're going to do, we're going to collect real-world data at the expense of patients. This is just not acceptable. And I'm not talking about rare disease, really niches where there's no patients and there's nothing else. We're talking about blood cancer, where we have the opportunity to do so. And we know, as patient organizations, that this is just this race to go to market, but this is at the expense of patients. I really want to stress that out. I think this is really important. And then second, it has not only from an ethical standpoint, we really are against it, and actually to your point about the EMA position paper, the Lymphoma Coalition contributed to that. But then it has an impact on access, because once we have a single-arm trial, I'm talking about the French, the French situation. If you got single-arm trial, because of the registration on the expensive drug list, the criteria for a drug to be on the expensive drug list, if it's a single-arm trial, then it's going to get an ASMR 5, which is the lowest score, so it can't go on the expensive drug list. So if it's not a good drug, you'd say it's great, but we're missing out on potential opportunities. So when we have a single-arm trial and it's a wonder drug, fine. But when it's a drug where you need data to actually determine whether it has good quality of life or not, this is just not feasible. And the last point on the toxicity and everything, we always hear toxicity. The toxicity profile is manageable. For who? For oncologists or for patients. So to determine that toxicity profile in the medium long term, it's really key to talk to patients, because patients are not going to say everything they experience or they feel to their hematologist might not have, or the clinical trial. There are things that they don't say that should be said, and they should be factored in. Thank you.
Probably to make it even more problematic, and I really like your plea for randomized trials, and I see somebody sitting behind you, our biostatistician, who likes it very much as well. We also have to realize that many cancer drugs are approved based on surrogate endpoints, which is progression-free survival, response rate. Those are not meaningful endpoints for patients. They are easy, relevant endpoints to get early drug approval. So here we also, yeah, go ahead.
Response rates is a big deal for a patient, cancer patient. I mean, I'm telling you, when you got this anxiety, sorry.
Cancer patients, when they've got their scan, they've got anxiety, and when they see they've got response, it's a big deal. When you're told you've got progression-free survival, and I know it seems like, it's not a hard endpoint, but you would get a lot of cancer patient organizations that would tell you it is these are meaningful to patients as well.
Yeah, but you have to realize that there may be other medicines for the same patient that do result in overall survival. Right. So the patient, I mean, I agree that it looks nice, and as a doctor, it's great to tell your patient that she or he is responding. But what you really want for your patient is a longer and better life, and they are on medicines that don't give it to them. So we have to realize that we have to be critical about this as well, I think.
I completely agree with you. I mean, obviously patients want to survive, but between two drugs, one that would give a good response rate and a long progression-free survival and one that doesn't, and OS being equal, patients, it's just the feeling is different.
I totally realize this, but we have to realize that for many indications there are several drugs available, and if as a patient you spend your time on a drug that doesn't give you the benefit that everybody intended to give you, then we should be careful there as well. I mean, new looks always fancy and nice, but it's not necessarily better.
Perhaps a couple of short questions, more technical questions from the web. To Laura, probably, to the Barcelona team, I don't know. The ARI 0001, this component, available only for patients in clinic in Barcelona via hospital exemption. Could you comment?
I guess they are asking me because I'm working at this hospital. So yes, it's only because it's under the prime. It's under the prime, as you mentioned. So nowadays it's just only for patients in Barcelona, as much as I know, in our hospitals. But there are conversations with other hospitals and to see how the prime goes, and maybe in the future would be. But nowadays it's just for that. Maybe it could be some compassionate use in some cases that I don't have all the information, but as much as I know, it's just for Barcelona people. Hopefully soon for all the world.
Excellent. Another more technical question. Is the JCA submission deadline 45 days or 90 days before CHMP opinion? The timeline guidance released this summer seemed to indicate that the JCA dossier submission deadline for the HDD is 90 days before the CHMP. Roisin.
Getting late in the evening for all these calculations, but it's at least 45 days prior to CHMP.
Yeah. Okay.
At least.
And a third, more procedural question. There was no consultation on dossier template and JCA timeline guidance coming from UNEDA 21. How will stakeholders be consulted during the implementing acts?
Okay, they're correct, because it was done quite late in the project, and it wasn't actually part of one of the deliverables, but we figured we needed to do it in order to inform the implementing acts. The implementing acts have a different procedure. They're outside the HTA coordination group, and I think there is a public, it's not quite a consultation, but I can't remember the terminology that's used, but the commission basically will put it out for comment, I think. Yeah.
If I may, a non-technical question, and that's from me, so it's not even on the web. So who would endorse a binding pre-trial PICO? So defining the questions before the trial. Yeah, but that's what I'm asking.
Yeah, well, I guess the way we operate is we're trying to look at a treatment that is, and I see Michael's will make comment on this as well, but we are operating towards a product-specific indication, but proposed indication, I suppose. We can't endorse anything at that point. We can have a discussion and a little bit of preparation around it, but we can't endorse anything at that point because it would be meaningless because we don't have a product. But maybe, I don't know.
Maybe just a few observations also on this regulatory HTA interface, because I think it's very important and it was flagged several times. It was mentioned regarding collaboration. So how can we make collaboration work and happening? And I think one of the elements which is also very important here is that wherever there's a workshop now that, for example, at EMA we are initiating, I dare to say that in every program committee we are now thinking, oh, how do we engage also with other decision makers such as HTAs in the program? We had a workshop on qualification of novel methodologies. We had, for example, their HTA colleagues involved in the PRO session because it's so dear to their particular work. HTAs are involved in the Cancer Medicines Forum, which was mentioned earlier also. There's a representation, and that's extremely important. It's also in the ACT EU multi-stakeholder platform, which has been regulated now or initiated now. So all of these areas are really touch points to connect between the different types of decision making. And I think it's fair to say that I personally believe on public body level, we have been working quite a lot since 2010 on this, and therefore it's also reassuring to hear what you were saying, Brian, that in industry this is also now, can I say, leveling up in the sense of the market access folks get heard more maybe in certain decisions when they are being made. From talking to industry and also talking, for example, at EAA panels where we just did a show of hands, sort of who is already engaging with the different functions. Earlier this year, we had done such a session at the HTA Town Hall, and there were 33% of the participants, and again, this was not representative, I accept all this for show of hands, but 33% were saying, yes, we are very much engaged. But then roughly 25% were saying, no, not at all yet. And we need to really bring those 25% also into this conversation. And I think it is a different degree of maturity also across the industry. So it's really a plea then also to connect the different decision makers also within industry. And it's maybe big pharma is a different stage than some SMEs because they have also some different types of work to be done there. And there is really a space where we need to collectively work and reach out more to really allow this discussion to happen. This brings me very briefly to JSC, Joint Scientific Consultation, which is really the key focus area to have then product-specific discussions. And again, Brian, you were mentioning, what about a prime product, how it's been taken up? Now, let's keep that example. So prime is, in a way, a regulatory framework in itself. It's been decided by regulators based on addressing an unmet need. But we have had we had a lot of discussion with the colleagues from the HTA community looking after the joint scientific consultation, and basically came to the conclusion that in principle prime products qualify also for the criteria under the HTA regulation. So we can nowadays flag to developers of prime designated products the importance of having also parallel JSC built into their development plan. In fact, this week we had a kickoff meeting on Monday where again this was raised to the developer, and we were reaching out to the JSC colleagues from the subgroup before doing this. So there is a lot which is happening at this stage, and we can therefore shape this together. Equally, you were asking about the single-arm trials, so what could be the comparators, etc. Well, Caroline already presented also our lines to take in this regard, and the primary focus is on RCTs, remains on, but there's certain situations, I don't rehearse this now in the interest of time, because Jörg is already getting nervous. It's always when he gives me the microphone, he's getting nervous. Again here, what I would like to say is, if ever there is a development which is deviating from what is gold standard practice, come for advice, come for parallel joint scientific consultation. Conditional marketing authorization was raised earlier. Don't think just until the approval, but think about the post-licensing evidence generation to get this into the package earlier. And that's not necessarily happening enough today. So the focus on PLEG where I'm personally much of an advocate for, is far too little in some of these conversations. Present the evidence package, the integrated evidence package. That's something which is so key. And last but not least, you were mentioning the expert involvement versus expert group involvement, or combination of expert. And as Roisin was saying, and we have the same work, of course, on the regulatory side, it really depends on which context you're consulting. If your context is methodologies, if your context is a guidance, if it's principles, then of course we can go to associations, which we do as well. If it is on product-specific matters, on assessment-specific matters, we have to assess particular conflict of interest, and that's key for us in all these discussions. So we have to go to individual experts. Experts, plural, so it's not just a single one, but therefore we cannot go to groups. And we have had a lot of discussion with the HTA colleagues over the past years under our work plan, and have in fact developed, I think, principles which are very much aligned in doing so, with the same thinking behind how can you involve different experts, be it healthcare professionals, clinicians, or patients, in our work, and apply the necessary principles all along in a parallel way. So just these few additions. Thank you.
Comments from the panel on this nice summary, Michael. I think excellent overview. Any final comments from the panel? Then I think we are in time, and let's give the panel a big applause.